I've copied the shape of this pattern and location of the stitch holes, and so I'm going to cut it out with a utility knife with a sharp blade in it. And this surface here is actually the proper kind of mat. It just was so unattractive that I put some white covering over it. But it is the right kind so that I'm not dulling this knife as I cut. So it's probably going to take several times around to get it just right. But I'll continue and get it all cut out, then come back. If you are making your bottom sole out of natural rubber, really cut it so that I'm really pulling on with this thumb and fingers below it so that I don't make little divots on the side, because it's really hard. In fact, I haven't really been able to do it, to sand the edges so they're smooth by hand. I can smooth the edges with a belt sander, so if you have one of those, great. So I've just about finished with this one. And it looks like there's some little rough spots. So I'll use a belt sander to sand that smooth. When you sand it, it changes the look of this outside edge. So it's, if you sand it in one little spot to take off something that's not smooth, do the whole sole so it will all have the same appearance. If you use this thinner natural rubber, it's about 1/8 of an inch thick instead of 1/4 of an inch thick. It's much easier to cut out and to stitch through, and it still gives you a little bit of compression of the stitches so that the stitches aren't lying right on the ground where they could be vulnerable. So this is a nice option. So I'll draw around this, and then we'll cut it out with a regular pair of scissors. So to finish this edge nicely, first of all, I'll sand it, and you can use a rasp that you can rub the edge on to smooth it down. Especially if you cut this out with a utility knife, you're probably going to need some work to get it nice and smooth. Of course, the easiest thing is if you have a belt sander, then you can automatically rub this against the sandpaper as it's moving and sand it down quite easily. You can use sandpaper. And I like this sanding sponge the best, and you can use it wet or dry. I'm just going to wet this edge a little bit, and then rub along here. It kind of fits the contours better than any other kind of effort. But I see I'm getting kind of a ridge built up that needs to be beveled. So that will be my next job once I get this as smooth as can be. So here's my beveler, and so I'll just go along here, and where there's a bit of a raised edge, I can actually, this doesn't matter so much in a shoe as it does in a sandal to have, because you don't really see this edge, but we'll get it nice and clean anyway. Then beeswax is a good thing to use for the next smoothing effort. To start smoothing the edge, I'm going to use water again and rub it with this piece of canvas taken from a pair of pants that were worn out. So I'm just going to rub and rub and rub and rub until it starts to look like the edges are getting, the pores are getting smoothed. And then I'll use this beeswax candle. Of course, I'll do this all around the edge of the sole. And rub again. And there are burnishing tools that you can get that so that's I can feel that that's nice and smooth and has a nice look to it. So I'll do that around the rest of the sole. I hope you can see that this edge is nice and smooth. It's been darkened by the beeswax rubbed into it. There are a couple of other kinds of ways that you can burnish. One is this: you can attach either of these to a drill, or you can take one like this and rub it by hand. And this is nice because it kind of creates that curve that causes it to look even more polished and complete. Here's my new favorite way to store the Aqualim 315 or EcoWeld non-toxic cement, is to put it in these picnic ketchup bottles, as described by Lisa Sorrell, and I squirted some down the center here, and then I'm using this brush that I keep in a little jar, and I made a hole in the lid with a punch. And so any other container starts to look pretty grimy after a short time. So having these inexpensive, simple kind of containers is really helpful. So I'm putting a natural rubber sole cemented to this top sole. I'm going to take some of that excess glue off here, put it over here. And then if I need a little more, I'll give another little squirt. And spread that out. This is a acid brush from Harbor Freight. You get a bunch of them for practically nothing. Okay. Take a while, especially for the natural rubber to dry, so I'll put it under a fan to speed it up a little bit. The cement has dried on both the leather top sole and the natural rubber bottom sole. So I'm going to line these up as carefully as I can. I'm going to start up here at this toe bulge and see that that feels lined up, and then carefully line the sides up. I'm not pushing down anywhere yet until I get back here to the heel and have that all lined up. So looks like I've got it now, so I'll press these two together. The edge of the top sole has already been smoothed off and has a little shine, and the natural rubber doesn't need it, so I'm ready to move on to working on stitching the upper to the sole.